Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about the rise of the far right in Europe. Joining me now from San Francisco is Cécile Oldouet. She has interviewed the leader of France's National Front Party, Marine Le Pen, and is writing a book about her. Joining me from New York is Daniel Levin. He advises governments on political and economic issues. Welcome to both of you to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cécile, let me start with you. We've seen the rise of the far right in Europe, and to what extent do you attribute this rise? I mean, they're rapidly gaining support, especially in countries like France, and as we mentioned, you spoke to Marine Le Pen, who is the leader of the National Front in France. Are they gaining some element of respectability and acceptance now?
Yes, certainly, and I think this has been the strategy of many far-right parties in Europe in the last 7 to 10 years, and specifically for Marine Le Pen in France, since she took up leadership in 2011. And this is very effective. People are not afraid to vote National Front anymore. It's not a taboo the way it used to be. And now she is, gaining traction in wider and wider segments of the population in France.
Daniel, as we heard Cécile there say that, it's not a taboo any longer in Europe, but it's accompanied by the rise of nationalism and crass racism in almost all instances. And we know what happened in Europe in the last century with the rise of nationalism and the kind of racism that we're seeing right now. Do you think we're heading down that dark road again?
Well, I don't want to overuse the word, fascism or Nazi imagery a little too quickly. You don't want to abuse those terminologies, but you certainly see that it is becoming socially acceptable to evoke overtly racist imagery and xenophobic imagery. We had in France, Cécile will be familiar with this, last year, the association of the Justice Ministry with very racist imagery that became very mainstream, even if it was on the surface condemned by the party. To see in Hungary an extremely racist, xenophobic party rise to the top, a Fidesz party, and the only thing that keeps it from being viewed as more racist is there's someone even to the right of it, the Jobbik party, which could describe as Eurofascist, together with Golden Dawn in Greece. So yes, I think it's becoming more mainstream and more acceptable.
And Cécile, when we look at the National Front in France, I mean, you've talked with Marine Le Pen, and there was an interesting thing you said about her, which I read in a magazine piece that you wrote. You wrote that whereas her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, with his xenophobic, anti-Semitic, racist views, was easy to hate, she is hard not to like. So she does, of course, turn on the charm. But as you also point out, that the party and the leader remains deeply nationalistic and xenophobic. So is she shifting the party perhaps a little bit to the center, you would say, to gain more acceptance?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, there's a discrepancy between what is in her agenda, her political platform, and the image that she is projecting forward to gain more acceptance. So as a person, she's very likable. She has a great sense of humor. She's a down-to-earth mother of 3 children. She can talk to you about the price of school supplies and, pizza takeout. But when you look specifically at the political agenda, it has not changed since her father left the party. What has changed is the image, the rhetoric, and the way in which she has been able to also capture some progressive vocabulary, such as, for instance, attack Islamists for being homophobic or misogynist. So taking on a progressive agenda of defending women's rights and gay rights, when you look into the details of her agenda, she remains very much a far-right party.
But she has managed, hasn't she, to tap into deep dissatisfaction in France, and not just in France, but across Europe as well. When we look at what is going on in Europe, I mean, we had the Euro debacle. We have the fact that there is very high unemployment right now. We have the fact that young people, especially in Europe, look at the institutions of the European Union very skeptically.
Yes, I mean, Euroscepticism is rampant, and she is certainly I'm not sure if she's the right person at the right time, but she is coming with her agenda at the right time, because she is benefiting from this general disappointment with both the economy, the political institutions of Europe. The fact, as you mentioned, that the youth is one of the victims of high unemployment. In France, you have up to 24% of unemployment among the under 25-year-olds. And not surprisingly, her populist agenda of reining in Europe and giving more power to national states, and also revamping the welfare state, is, resonating with the discontent of a lot of people in France, and the parties in other countries which have similar agendas do exactly the same.
Daniel, the right-wing parties in Europe have gained a foothold in some local legislatures. We've just seen in France, in local municipalities, the extreme right doing better than they've done before. But if we look at something like the European Parliament, they've gained a foothold there, but they're also looking to expand. There's elections coming up for the European Parliament in just a few weeks. Can they get together in a body like the European Parliament and act as a bloc? I mean, we've seen already that in one instance, they support Vladimir Putin right now.
Well, I think, first of all, maybe we should go back just a little bit to just a small parenthesis to the Le Pen family. I mean, in 2002, Jean-Marie Le Pen shocked the establishment by placing second in the first round and beating out Lionel Jospin of the Socialist Party. So it's not quite that new that it's acceptable or mainstream to vote for the National Front, and certainly Marine Le Pen has detoxified that party to certainly in the rhetoric. As it goes to the European Parliament election, I think that polls show, of course, you're going to always have a massive center-right and center-left bloc of about 28% each. That's what's expected. The question is, how will the recent success of the Front National in France or Fidesz and Jobbik in Hungary, how will it galvanize the right wing in the European Parliament elections in May 22nd to 25th? And there, I think, what is expected is that they will probably be able to gather a block of about 90 out of the 751 votes. And that's sizable enough to get EU funding and to be recognized as a significant bloc. So I think they will now have enough of a critical mass to be very loud. How much they can accomplish and whether they can pass legislation, I'm not so sure, especially since they're very much running on an anti-EU and anti-Euro platform.
Yeah, what do you make of the fact that they express support for Vladimir Putin?
It's very interesting. To me, that's very much where, again, the words right and left are a little strange. They've certainly embraced this Central European strongman. Orban very much looks at himself that way. Others in Europe do too. And that's very much Putin's mold. They've been interesting in their reaction to the annexation of Crimea now. They are very much in the same category of this believers in this collectivist state capitalism. They blur the lines between party and state. That's very much Putin's thinking. And of course, his distaste for the EU as a supranational agency and is something that they can share. So the extremes in that sense do meet. But I also think we have to be a little bit careful. On the one hand, they of course have the right-wing rhetoric, anti-immigration, and strong law and order. But they also have leftist manifestos. They believe in limiting trade. They're against globalization. They're against raising the retirement age. They're for handouts. Orban won an election very much also based on that, on lowering utility bills and giving handouts. So I think that on the ideological front, they are really kindred spirits.
Cecile, what is being done to counter the rise of the right? I mean, it certainly has got the attention of the more mainstream politicians and the bureaucrats who sit in Brussels. They've called for a report. That report's been tabled, and they're looking at various proposals. But what can be done?
Well, there are different strategies that have been put forward by different parties, and I would say you have maybe 2 or 3 different ones. The current socialist administration in France is betting on an improvement of the economic situation to kind of quell the discontent of the electorate. The thing is, it takes a long, long time to be able to turn around an economy that has been so much into trouble since 2008. So results are not coming forward. The other thing that has been done more on the right side of the political spectrum is to actually tap into the pet issues of the National Front Party, which are immigration, insecurity, Romas, topics that seem to be important to voters even though immigration has not really changed over the last 10 years. And those more cultural issues, if you wish, are easier to talk about because you can have a very strong language against immigration, and results are kind of subjective to a certain level for the people on the ground. Right now, what we're seeing is that the National Front is not slowing down in its progression. Each election seems to give them more votes and more support. So there is a big question of, what is the responsibility of the parties in place in this progress?
Daniel, I've got 30 seconds. We've run out of time, but what's your take on what can be done?
I think that to some extent, with the exception of Hungary, because it's now a second term, we haven't yet had the emperor has no clothes moments. In other words, it's very easy to be in opposition and be shrill. To some extent, these parties have to be exposed also when they do have decision-making power, and I don't think the European Parliament is the forum for that.
Okay.
I am encouraged by seeing the new Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, because I do believe he is more of a Bill Clinton, Tony Blair type of socialist leader who can lead it to the center.
Okay, Daniel, we're going to have to leave it there. Daniel Levin, Cecile Oldway, thanks for joining us.